talking on the subject of boundaries. Now, how do boundaries fit into this whole domestic violence abuse subject that we're talking about? It is the primary tool that we have to make things work in life. I want you to think of something. What would happen here in the city of Wichita if we had no boundary lines and no one knew who owned any of the property? What would happen? Chaos. How about you? I'd line up for a house in Tallgrass. I don't think there's other parts of town, there may not be too many people lining up for the houses, would there? And how much conflict do you think we would have? What's the same thing in life? Now, what is a boundary? Defined, it's a limiting or dividing line or mark, anything indicating a limit or a confine. It explains who owns it, who is responsible for it, where the property begins and ends, and helps limit the passage or protect the property. It's sort of like a personal fence. Let me ask you a question. How many of you here drive down Kellogg at 200 miles an hour? You don't do that? How come? Okay, first there is a law. What is a law? It is a boundary. It's an official boundary that people agree to, and it says you will drive the speed limit or you can get a ticket or get your license taken away, right? Notice that people don't all obey the law, do they? And what do they get? The consequence. But what are some other laws or boundaries that keep you from driving that fast down Kellogg? You're right, the car won't go that fast. That is a boundary. What's another one? If you go that fast, you might kill somebody else, you might get killed yourself. You might get away with it several times, but one day your tire blows and it's all over. Why don't you jump off the Empire State Building? Because this doesn't stop at the bottom, right? That's a boundary. Why doesn't the ocean flow onto the land like a tsunami all the time? Because it's a boundary called gravity. What I'm trying to suggest is God has a method, and everything in life that is organized around this topic we're talking about called boundaries. God has 3 lines of motivation. The first line of motivation is when you got born, He sent an owner's manual with you, like you do with a car. It's called the Bible. What is the Bible? It is a boundary book. It says that if you do these certain things, you will be blessed. You'll get good consequences. And if you do these certain things, you'll be cursed. You'll get these bad consequences, right? How many people obey God's boundary book? Not too many. So what does God do then? If you read the Old Testament, it will say, after the children of Israel rebelled after the 15th time, it will say, and He turned them over to their own devices. That's the second level. In other words, He let you make your mistakes and learn from your consequences. After you don't have a license for 5 years and you have a $25,000 fine for all the speeding tickets that you got, maybe you think twice, right? What happens to people, though, that don't learn from their consequences? Because there are some. Then comes the judgment. Big consequences. You might make it down Kellogg 15 times and get away from the police. But that 16th time, it's icy and you spin out at 100 miles an hour, you probably won't do it again if you live through it. Big things happen. So that's God's sort of overall thing. Now, what are personal boundaries? They tell me what is me and what is not me. A good personal boundary is your skin. It keeps the bad out and keeps the good in, right? Without skin, we'd be in real trouble, wouldn't we? It tells me what I'm responsible for and what I'm not responsible for in relationships. That's where we primarily use it. It tells me what choices are mine and what choices are not mine. What choices are somebody else's. It tells me I'm responsible for what? My feelings, my attitudes and beliefs, my behaviors, my choices, my values, my limits, my talents, my thoughts, my desires, who I'm going to have a relationship with. Those are choices I'm supposed to make. When we deal with people without boundaries, like in codependency and so on, what happens? They try and take responsibility for other people. They enable other people. They try to do for other people what they can do for themselves. They expect other people to do for them what they shouldn't be doing. You see what I'm saying? You have all this confusion and chaos if you don't have the boundaries that make it very clear of what I'm responsible for, what I should be doing, what I should be controlling, what I should not be controlling. Boundaries help keep the good in and the bad out. Compliance are people who say yes to the bad. They allow people to run them over, don't they? Avoidance are those that say yes to the good. Controllers don't take responsibility. They try to manipulate. And how is control different from a boundary? Control tries to take away your free will. A boundary never takes away the choice of the other person. If they are willing to take the consequence, they can violate it, right? But hopefully what is going to happen? They're going to learn from the consequences so the behavior will eventually stop. Abused people many times keep the bad in and keep the good out because they're afraid. Some people don't know the word no. They try to be nice to people because they hope those people will be nice back to them, right? Another type of boundary sometimes is geographical distance. Sometimes that's what you have to use to protect yourself. Time is another type of boundary. If you're not there, you don't get hurt, right? Emotional distance is another type of boundary. Consequences. No trespassing signs are another type of boundary. In the Bible, this is best explained in Galatians chapter 6, verses 2 and 5. But don't read this in King James because unfortunately they translated 2 Greek words as 1 English word, so it makes absolutely no sense. I read it to you in another translation. Verse 2. Carry each other's excessive burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Verse 5. Each one should carry his own load. I'll give you my interpretation of what I like to say. Help others carry the mountains that are about ready to crush them, but let everyone carry their own backpack. See, yes, we are to help people, but not to do for them what they can do for themselves. That's called enabling. And that's what an awful lot of people do that do not have good boundaries. Now, why is it that a lot of people don't set boundaries? Well, first, they never learn. No one ever taught them about boundaries. They got run over all their life. Their family was chaos. They don't know about boundaries. They don't know how to operate. They were violated in an abusive family. So they just see boundaries as something people run over. They're afraid they're going to get angry. And they're afraid of anger. They see them as control. They don't see any difference between boundaries and control. They fear abandonment or separateness. If I set boundaries, they're not going to like me, they're going to leave me, my needs aren't going to get met. So I'd rather let them run me over and for that to happen. Fear of punishment. If I do that, they're going to come back at me. They fear of shame. Fear of being bad or selfish. They think that if you set a boundary, it's because you're selfish. I'm going to suggest the motivation for setting boundaries, it should be love. The myths of boundaries. If I set boundaries, I am selfish. Boundaries are a sign of disobedience. If I set a boundary, I will be hurt by others, or I will hurt others. Boundaries mean I'm angry. If I set boundaries, it injures me. Boundaries make me feel guilty. Boundaries are permanent, and I don't want to burn my bridges. About all these ideas of why they don't use this system, but this is the only system that really works in straightening out people's lives that live in chaos and confusion. Now I'm going to teach you boundaries in a particular way that I try to explain boundaries to people. And we're going to use a story. How many of you live in a house? Okay? How many of you have a next door neighbor? How many of the next door neighbors have a dog? How do you like that? Applies to everyone here today. So here's the story. Tomorrow morning, you look out of your window and you see their dog in your yard chewing up your newspaper. How do you feel? Angry. And you know that you should feel angry? Remember, anger is simply energy to resolve a problem. Do you have a problem? What is the problem? What boundaries have been violated? There are two boundaries that have been violated. What are the boundaries? Well, the first one, they're in your yard, right? What do you believe about your yard? The yard belongs to you, right? And therefore, you have a right to control what goes on in the yard, right? And if you didn't give him permission to run his dog in your yard, where should his dog be? Not in your yard. Where? Secondarily, what other boundaries have been violated? You paid for the newspaper, and it's your newspaper, and you shouldn't have to read over all the slaughter, right? So do you see people are automatically angry when their boundary is violated? But that doesn't mean everybody does the same thing. In fact, there are 4 different choices of what to do when your boundaries are violated. How many of you here would just forget it and you'd be passive and you do nothing? Raise your hand. Not too many takers. What is wrong with that? Maybe a little over here. Okay? What is wrong with that particular solution? You will get walked on. It will happen again and again, and you will stuff your anger, and eventually you will either blow up, or you will get sick, or you will be mad at your neighbor. Right? Okay? What's the opposite solution? Many times when we use this example, somebody will say, I would kick the dog, I'd throw a rock at the dog, I'd shoot the dog. What is wrong with that solution? That solution is called aggression. What is wrong with that solution? Well, that's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And if you believe in that, eventually the entire world becomes blind and toothless. Because the neighbor is looking out the window and you kick their dog, so they threw a rock through your window, so you threw a grenade through theirs. If you want a perfect example of that, look at the Palestinians and the Israelis. They both believe in religions that believe in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And how well have they done in resolving the situation? There's another one that we see quite often. Another thing people do. It's called passive aggression. What does passive aggression look like? Well, you just, their dog was in your yard, you don't say anything, but you're mowing your yard, and the lawnmower just gets out of control, runs over their flowers. Too bad, right? You're very sorry. Or you happen to have some moles in your yard, so you get some mold poison, and you just happen to have a dog dish, you stick it in the dog dish, and you stick it outside, and their dog just happened to eat your mold poison and die, and you're so sorry. It was an accident, wasn't it? In other words, you're getting back. You're still doing an eye crime for tooth, but you're trying to do it in a way you can't get blamed for what's going on. And the final solution is we call being assertive. That is, respecting other people's boundaries, defending your own boundaries, and trying to do it in such a way that you can still have healthy relationships and you're not causing all sorts of problems. And that's what you want to focus on. Okay, so what would your first step be? If that happened to you, when you really think of it, act like it really happened to you, okay? You see the dog over there, he's chewing up your newspaper, what would you do? Go and talk to him, right? But I want to clarify that going and talk to him and what you're really accomplishing there. Because, see, there's something important you have to realize. Does everyone agree on the same boundaries? Now, how do we determine what we think the boundaries ought to be in life? What we grew up with. So you're going over there and you think that your neighbor agrees with you that his dog shouldn't be in your yard and that he shouldn't be eating your newspaper, right? But maybe he comes from the Ozarks. Tell you a little story there to put that in perspective. My wife found out that we have some relatives that live in the Ozarks. And I wasn't available because I was working, but she took our kids and some other relatives and went to visit them. And they went down this dirt road, clear back into the woods, and there was their house. And there were no fences whatsoever. The cows were on their front lawn. The doors were open, and the animals could walk right to the house. Do you think a person living there is going to be concerned about their dog being in your yard? In fact, what would their solution be? Well, dummy, you should have one of those boxes on the side, you know, to stick the newspaper in so the animals won't get your newspaper. It's your fault, it's not ours. Do you see how you have to figure this thing out? So what do? Say, dear sir, would you agree that it isn't right for your dog to be in my yard chewing up my newspaper? You have to get agreement where the boundary lines are. And sir, would you agree that, you see this yellow pin? Do you see that yellow pin? Would you agree that your property is on that side of the yellow pin and my property is on this side of the yellow pin? And your property doesn't go all the way over to the side of my house. Because he might think his dog was in his yard and you threw your newspaper in his yard. See, we have to clarify it and get it down to a razor-sharp line. You're either on this side of the line, you're on this side of the line. And we both agree where the lines are. You see what you're doing? And of course, you would then ask him and say, please keep your dog in your yard and not eating my newspaper, okay? He says, okay. But the next day, there's a dog in your yard eating your newspaper. What are you going to do now? Shoot the dog, right? Now, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to have to go over and let the neighbor know what the consequences are if the dog is continually in your yard eating your newspapers. But before that, we have to get down to the real core issue of boundaries. So you understand what's really going on, and you understand why you're angry when your boundary is being crossed. Because the boundary violations are a violation of God's system. Let me just ask you a question. How many of you think it would be okay if I robbed the bank and you go to jail? You don't like that? What inherently is wrong with that? See, everybody would agree with that. That it isn't right if I choose to do something and you get the consequences. Now, do you see how that messes up God's system? Is God's system is what? You make the choice, you learn from the consequence. But if every time I rob the bank, you go to jail, Is that going to stop me from robbing banks? No. And you're going to spend a lot of time in jail, aren't you? In fact, it's going to embolden me to continue to rob banks, isn't it? So do you see the principle here? So the idea is, all we're trying to do in boundaries is trying to align things so that the person who makes the choice is the person who gets the consequence. And this allows us to determine what the consequence should be. In our particular example, who is making the choice? The neighbor, right? He's letting his dog run. Who is getting the consequence? We are, right? What is the consequence that we're getting? A wet, slobbered up, chewed up newspaper. So therefore, what should the consequence of my boundary be? That he gets a wet, chewed up, messed up newspaper. So the easy solution is what? You go to your neighbor and say, "Dear neighbor, I'm sorry, it seems like you're really having a hard time locking up your dog," or whatever. Can we agree? At any time my newspaper gets chewed up, I will simply come over and switch it for your good one. Or if you don't have a newspaper, I'll bring it to you and you go down and buy me a new one. And you give me the money for the chewed up newspaper. Do you see what we've done? We simply align the person making the decision with the consequence, and therefore, how long is it going to take before he deals with his dog? See, why didn't he deal with his dog? He didn't get any consequences. Now realize, what if he doesn't agree to that? Then you have to go to the next level of boundaries, and we have level after level after level, right? You go to him and say, "Dear sir, I'm sorry you didn't agree. That would be the easy way for us to resolve this, but I have to let you know that you're living in the city of Wichita, and we have a leash law. And if I see your dog running because you won't cooperate and tie your dog up, or you won't deal with this issue, I'll have no choice but to call the dog pound and have your dog picked up. And by the way, it's going to cost you $100. But what if he still doesn't do it? Then we take him to the next level. It's called small claims court. You can file a civil suit of the damage he is doing to your property. You see what I'm saying? The idea is you build a fence. If the dog goes over the fence, you build it higher. If the dog goes over the fence, you had chicken wire. Dog still goes over the fence, you had razor wire. Then landmines and 50-caliber machine guns. The idea, and we're dealing with boundaries, is what? That you continue to raise the boundary and the consequence until the behavior stops. You'll see that when we're dealing in the area of domestic violence, one of the areas we're applying this to, we use what we call tripwires. Tripwires are a series of boundaries. Because see, what do we want to, we don't want to say to you, okay, well, I'll tell you what, you tell him that the next time he beats the living daylights out of you and puts you in the hospital, you're calling the police. Well, that necessitates what? And you get beat up and put in the hospital. No, we don't want that. We want something like a tripwire over here that says, if you ever get angry, you'll agree you'll leave for an hour. If you ever get verbally abusive or say anything, you'll leave for a day. If you ever blow your top, you're gone for a week. And you have to go to domestic violence for a week. See what I'm saying? And basically you have multiple boundaries that you use to warn yourself. Tripwire comes from the military. They're worried about the enemy coming in, so what do? They put multiple rings of sensors around so they can see when the enemy comes in the first line, they can get more ready and try and stop them before they hit the next line, the next line, the next line. Because that's a way of applying boundaries in this particular area and the kind of things that goes on there. Now we have what we call the law of boundaries. There's a bunch of laws that were involved here. The first law of boundaries is called the law of sowing and reaping. What does that mean? I have to allow you to sow what you want. If you sow corn, you're going to get corn. If you sow bad things, you're going to get bad things. I've got to allow you to learn. I've got to respect you enough to allow you to learn by your own choices and your own consequences, right? I can't tell you what to sow. The law of responsibility. Real love means doing what is best for them, not for yourself. Because the reason I'm setting the boundaries is not just to protect me, but to have a healthy relationship. To have your best interest in mind also. The law of power. I give you the power to agree about the truth concerning your problem. To submit your inability to God. The ability to learn within your boundaries. The power to repent. The power to humble yourself and ask for help. The power to make amends to those that you've injured. You understand? All those things you're allowing the other person to do, right? Whether they do or not, that's their problem. The law of respect. So in everything, do to others what you would have them to do to you. Because I respect you so much, I give you the right to screw up your life if you want to. I give you enough rope to hang yourself if you want to. Because you are a viable human being that can learn from your own mistakes and your own consequences. The law of motivation. We must be motivated by love, not selfishness. The law of evaluation. We must be honest about our feelings and reactions. The law of envy. Keep your focus inside your own boundaries. The law of activity. You have to take action to defend your boundaries. And the law of exposure. You are responsible for identifying your own boundaries. And by the way, all this information comes out of the Boundaries book, okay? You have a number of different books about this by Cloud and Townsend. What are the areas that we apply boundaries to? Almost everything. Family, friends, spouse, children, work, self, God. How do we set up natural consequences? If you just think about it, naturally, as this happens, what is the natural consequence that a person would have? See, we use these to set up family rules for families. We use these to set up things to stop all sorts of behavior, to help all sorts of situations. But you want the consequence to be natural. What I mean by that is, because the kid got a D in his report card, you don't take away his car. See what I'm saying? What does the car have to do with the D on the report card? Unless they were chasing all over the place with the car. Now, if they are being drunk and driving, then taking away the car is a very valid thing to do. See the idea? Now, do you believe that some people might resist boundaries? There's an interesting book. It's called Don't Let the Jerks Get the Best of You. Jerks are boundary violators. It suggests that about 50% of our population are first-degree jerks. That means they violate people's boundaries accidentally, and when they're told about it or confronted, they'll be repentant and they'll do something about it. Another 40% are second-degree jerks. That's boundary violators. Those are people who they say they're repentant, but they really are trying to meet their own needs, and they'll run you over if they can. And then we have what they call nth-degree jerks. Those are sociopaths. They don't have any remorse. They don't care. They're the kind of people you have to have very solid boundaries and keep a distance from, because you will get hurt. How do we deal with boundaries? We allow them to learn from their own consequences, and we work them through until the behavior stops. And we keep raising the boundary if necessary. Once they become safe, we can then slowly take the boundaries back down again, right? You don't need the protective walls of someone that's safe, someone that's a second or nth degree jerk. You're going to need boundaries forever. You just have to work it through that way. In closing, let me give you an example of a bad boundary. And this is a true story. Had a couple sitting in my office, and this is what the wife said to the husband. Dear husband, if you ever drink again, I'll divorce you. Now, why did he say that? Because she came from an alcoholic family. And so she had a fear that he would drink and become an alcoholic, right? But what's wrong with that boundary? Well, the first thing is, how is she going to know whether he drank or not? In fact, the way it came out was he came home one day chewing gum. What do you think she thought? He's covering up the smell of alcohol. He drank. Well, he denied it. Now she's got a problem. You shouldn't have divorced him for chewing gum. The second problem with a boundary is it really practical? Is that a right boundary, a right consequence of dealing with drinking that you divorce him? What do you think? What should the consequence be? It should be that he goes to a treatment program, right? See what I'm saying? Now, if he won't go to the treatment program, you might end up having to kick him out of the house, and then maybe finally, if he totally won't obey any boundaries, you might eventually have to threaten to get a formal separation or something. Do you see what I'm saying? Does the Bible give you grounds for divorcing somebody based on the fact they drink? No, it doesn't. But you'll find that if you'll set adequate boundaries, either they're going to stop the drinking, or they're probably going to divorce you. What we found is that boundaries work if we can get at least one of the people healthy, and they will set good boundaries. It is the basis for resolving most issues. Now, if the person continues to violate the boundaries, then you go deeper and try and figure out what's going on. You see what I'm saying? But you see that boundaries are the first step in helping a couple recover from any type of abuse, whatever it is. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you that you designed the world in such a way that there are methods that can be used to resolve abuse, to stop abuse, to help people learn how to live in harmony and not in chaos. And we ask that you help us to be effective of learning how to do these things, applying them in our own lives, in the lives of our clients. In Jesus' name.